Now that's an interesting term. We can call what the Indians are doing in Kashmir as state terrorism, state-sponsored terrorism. I mean, within their sovereign bounds, what they do is completely lawful. They have a law, AFSPA, Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which allows them and the armed forces to do whatever they want, basically. Okay. If they've done something illegal outside the bounds of AFSPA, the federal or the central government will have to give authority to prosecute that soldier. And in the history of Kashmir, I think they've given authority to prosecute maybe 58 cases or 51 cases, something like that. And if you just, I have a binder this thick, we just looked at the previous 5 or 6 years of human rights violations committed by Indian forces in Kashmir. There was one particular incident where in one night, in one village, 40 women were raped by Indian soldiers. And you didn't have a single prosecution for that, let alone investigation. So this is the type of, when you're talking about state sponsors of terrorism or state terrorism, that's one way of looking at it. Within that state, within that shield of sovereignty, we're viewing it very differently. Outside of that, we have the ability to criticize them and say, you're not only violating your own laws, you're also violating international. But we aren't forcefully enough making our case when it comes to Kashmir.
So who is to take care of all this? Like whether an act of terror is a state terrorism or act within the boundaries of law?
My friend, you're still living under the notion that life is fair. Firstly, life is not fair. So there is no, superpower, Superman who can come and say, oh, this is right, this is wrong. States do this stuff. States use that gray area to further their own agendas. And so the Indians feel that using pellets and using all the atrocities and human shields, for example, to suppress the Kashmiri dissent is a solution to it. There isn't much that people will do. One, India is considered one of the good guys. And now, because of its economic might, nobody wants to take a stand against it. People want contracts there. So if you offend it by saying, oh, you've done something wrong, India won't give you contracts. So the French won't say anything, the Brits won't say anything, the Americans won't say anything. And these are the people who have the largest soft power or the ability to project the most soft power and influence the world. So that's a very serious issue there. The capital that we had, we weren't able to fully capitalize on it or utilize it effectively, historically on Kashmir. What we've done so far is in itself, we've kept the issue alive, but situations are changing. Why don't we just move this desk and you can come here. You have to introduce yourself to the whole class. Your name?
Now or later on?
Now. Your name, your background, and what you hope to achieve from attending the course. This is what you get for being late.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
My name is Anwar. I am currently studying international law from International Islamic University. And let's see what I'm going to achieve from this course.
Alright. So we were looking at state sponsors of terrorism, right? So that's one thing. The second is a formal mechanism for declaring a state a sponsor of terrorism. For example, a UN system, or where you have very strong countries who are able to make designations within their system which projects very badly across the world. So for example, well, it depends what system is in it. If there's a UN mechanism that discusses that and mentions it. For example, we see Iran has been declared under various international mechanisms as a state sponsor of terrorism. Right? They have very legitimate concerns that they would raise in this issue.
So, like in Libya's case, R2P was used in order to intervene, and genocide was basically concern for genocide in Benghazi was used. So that's an example of how international law has been used.
So the exact legal instrument that was used there was the UN Security Council resolution.
Exactly.
To impose a no-fly zone.
Yes.
Security Council resolutions have a lot of degrees of variation within them. Okay, so a Security Council resolution can say, go bomb them to hell, right? And you would just have to rule, the countries that would go in would, obviously they're not going to say that specific, but they could say, remove this regime or do something like that, or protect civilians, right? When a no-fly zone is imposed, that doesn't mean you go hit targets on the ground. There's some targets that you have to hit. To maintain air superiority, you have to take out ground targets that can hit your planes, right? So you take out their air defense systems. Right? You take out, if their planes are threatening you, you can take out their planes or their air bases or their radars or stuff like that. But beyond that, you're not supposed to go hit tanks and hit buildings and assassinate people through your planes. So a no-fly zone is a very limited option there. That's what was given for Libya. But they used that because there was a particular clause in which says protecting civilians through a no-fly zone. They said, oh, we have to protect civilians, so we're going to destroy tanks on the ground, we're going to take out troops and infantry. So these were issues where they expanded through the scope, but who's there to check them? There's no judicial review of the implementation of the Security Council resolution.
The international state is chaos, right?
Exactly. Exactly. I won't go that far. But basically, there are very serious issues of implementation there.
How does the state of governance was have? Because Saudi imposed a ban and saying that it was war with terrorism. So does this come under the second category that it causes terrorism and declaring a state as a terrorist state?
Well, they've done it domestically. They haven't done it through an international mechanism. Okay, so there is no, they haven't gone through the UN to impose sanctions on it. They haven't gone through the Security Council, which would be a formal mechanism, right? So the Security Council imposes sanctions on countries, like they've done on Iran for the nuclear program, like they've done on many other countries as well. But for Qatar, they haven't gone through the UN. These are a bunch of Arab states who have come together and said, look, we are not going to deal with it. So as a group, they can do that. If it doesn't violate, it violates things like friendship treaties or friendly, brotherly relations between countries. When you say we're not going to take your ships.
This does influence international opinion about
Absolutely, absolutely.
shape the international relations.
It does, but right now, I mean, if you look at international public opinion, if you will, Qatar's on the right side here. Right? Qatar seems like they're not the bad guys, even though they're being called terrorists. But a lot of people are saying, one reason is that Trump is on the other side. So everybody is already on the opposite side. So it's not working out very well for the Saudi and the Gulf bloc. And what's coming out of this is you had 13 strict points that if you don't abide by these, we're going to cut off all relations or we're not fix this, if you will. Then they de-escalated to 6 principles, general principles that you should abide by, right? So we're seeing a de-escalation because we're seeing that this strategy was not well thought out. You can't be so rash when it comes to international relations. For the love of God, it is. You don't throw in something so destabilizing that it could threaten the entire region. And so these are problematic issues. Let's get back to this lecture because I have to. Kiss time per 12.
11:30. Sir.
12?
Time.
I think it's 12. Yeah, okay, brilliant. So just quickly go through the rest and we have a little bit of time for the discussion. So what did we have before? Yeah, so we had the state monopoly of violence and we had the 3 institutions in a domestic system. So what we see is we have the legislature which makes laws for the people, the executive which applies those laws or imposes those laws, executes those laws, administers them on the people, and then the judiciary who interprets the law for the people and makes decisions and puts prime ministers out of office, right? Anyway, well, it's a big decision today.
Yeah.
No, I don't think they're going to do anything today, right?
No, I think it's just gonna go on.
Yeah, I think it's going to go on for a bit.
Yeah.
People are going to make defenses and counter defenses.
Until the next election.
Yeah. So this is a domestic legal system in its most basic form, and it's vertical. The situation is vertical. It's top down. We, the people, are being ruled by these institutions, right? Whom we are supposedly electing. Anyway. What happens at the international plane? There is no international legislature. What's the closest thing to an international legislature that makes laws? Court. Sorry? UN what's the organs then? UN का तो ICJ भी organ है, which is a court.
International Law Commission.
International Law Commission is a think tank ऐसे है. It just suggests laws. It doesn't make laws. UN General Assembly की एक भी resolution binding नहीं है. Security Council. The closest approximation to a legislature which has binding effect is the Security Council. General Assembly, yes, makes resolutions, but Security Council resolutions are binding on all states. So they're as close to the law as we can. And the UN, the Security Council didn't use this power before. It's only recently after 9/11 that it used its legislative power in a legislative way. Or it used this binding power of its under Chapter 7 to impose obligations on states with regards to terrorist financing, capturing, giving harbor, all of these things under their particular Security Council resolutions. General Assembly is not binding, so it's not really what we could call a legislature. What about an executive? Who enforces the law at the international plane? Policeman कौन है international plane? है कोई?
I mean, not really.
United States?
Like,
NATO?
Security
Security Council? To an extent, yeah. The Security Council has the power to, if somebody violates or a gross violation of international law, sovereignty, these issues, they can impose sanctions or obligate other states to take military acts as well, embargoes, etc. Absolutely. So again, we've gone to the Security Council for that. But it's not really a close approximation. Sorry?
Is it controversial that whether it is a morally bind to or it is some force to enforce international law like a Security Council? Like
Yeah, absolutely.
Controversial opinion.
Absolutely, and we'll find out why that is. We'll
Yes.
find out exactly why. Because the nature of it, of issues at the international plane is very different from how it is domestically. And what about the judiciary? We have the ICJ.
Yes.
Okay, so अगर मैं Supreme Court or Kacheri, Sessions Court has a criminal case on me, can I say to the court, मैं आपकी jurisdiction नहीं करता? नहीं ना? I'm kind of in a bad situation there, right? I have no way out. It's a mandatory jurisdiction the court has. ICJ में you can accept or not accept its jurisdiction.
Like ICJ.
Yeah. The advisory is different. So if you accept the court's jurisdiction to solve your problems, then the court is binding on you, then the decision is binding. But if you don't accept it, like the US does not have a declaration accepting the court's jurisdiction. Or you can say to the court, like we've done now, that we accept your jurisdiction on these grounds, but not on these grounds. So can you do that with the local court? No. So is the ICJ like a normal court? Is the ICC like a normal court? No, again, states have to accept jurisdiction there.
Yes, but it becomes binding only if you consent, give a consent to the parties.
Wait.
Then it becomes binding, right?
Then it becomes binding. But most countries don't give consent to the ICJ.
Too much power.
Absolutely, there are issues there. And we go into the different grounds that you mentioned on how the court can impose its jurisdiction. So there are 4 or 5 grounds where the court can make a decision. One of them is an advisory opinion, which the lady mentioned. So advisory opinion, but that's sought by UN bodies, not by states. Okay, and that is non-binding. That's just like a scholarly opinion on a particular topic, because all the judges there are big scholars. So we don't really see a good mirroring or good reflection at the international level of how a domestic legal system works. We're clear with that, right?
Isn't the ICC better than ICJ? Wait, you don't need a
They- Sorry? You don't require?
You don't require the consent of the international.
No, you absolutely require. It depends. It depends if you capture the individual on. If the acts after 2000 took place on a territory of the state which has given consent, then and only then can you try a person who may be anywhere. But if that country where he happens to be has not given consent, then they don't have to submit him to the court's jurisdiction. So it's technical. So at the international plane, matters are decentralized. There isn't that vertical relationship. Every citizen of the international plane, basically every country, makes the laws for itself, regulates themselves, right? Judges each other on these issues, and makes determination. And that's where the issue of power and might comes in, because theoretically all states are equal, right? In the UN General Assembly, we all have one vote. But when it comes to the Security Council, there are 5 permanent members with a veto power who can, if they don't all agree to something or at least don't completely hate something, it can't pass. So that means those 5 individual countries have specific far more power than anyone else, right? So power to make law is therefore dispersed among the states. The states generally implement international law through self-enforcement, self-regulation, right? There's mutual benefit in adhering to international law, and you will see how that happens. We therefore say that at the international plane, a horizontal relationship exists between states, It's not vertical anymore, it's horizontal. All right, okay on this? So let's now get another boring textbook definition of international law. Another memory point, this is good to keep in mind. International law comprises a system of rules and principles that govern relations between sovereign states and other institutional subjects of international law. And we'll get to that in a bit. Such as the UN, the Arab League, the African Union, etc. Its primary focus has been states and international organizations. However, since the Second World War, there has been a gradual shift towards making the individual a direct subject of international law. Now, why was the individual always, kept to a side and not made a direct subject of international law? What was the theoretical framework because of that didn't happen? We just discussed it.
International, you have to, you have way of sovereignty.
Before,
No, there's a way of sovereignty.
Exactly, there was that shield, that veil of sovereignty.
before that, states were only called as
Exactly, absolutely.
After the Second World War, Nuremberg trial and Tocqueville trial.
So at the international level, states said, you pick on some of your own sides, don't pick with my citizen, don't pick a fight with them, you pick a fight with me. So if you think that this citizen of mine has committed a war crime, you sue me for it, or something along those lines. Now we see, after the Nuremberg trials and after the atrocities of the Second World War, where individuals can be tried for specific things. We've got piracy, which is an international crime. We have terrorism, which is an international crime. We have, so international law creates a crime which impacts an individual. This is also the case for Pakistan. The Anti-Terrorism Act in Section 6 says that in the schedule, I think it's the first schedule, all conventions which are listed, all the offences within them would also be crimes under the Anti-Terrorism Act, and a domestic court would try an individual for an offence under international law. Okay? So our domestic law hasn't even created that offence. International law has created that offence, but it will be tried by a court in Pakistan. Okay, so that's how we see international law start to impact individuals. When you impose sanctions on individuals for their travel or for their money, freezing their money, which has taken place for Al-Qaeda, Taliban and their associates, that we see the international regime on this. That's why it's important to realize that it's now impacting individuals, which could, unless hopefully nobody wants to engage in war crimes and crimes against humanity here, but it could impact you as well. There you go. So now just to clarify, what we've discussed is public international law. Okay? Public international law is between state A and state B. There is another form of international law known as private international law, which is not what we're going to be talking about throughout these 4 or 5 days. And that is between citizens or legal personality, legal persons in 2 different countries who have to do trade or engage in contracts or something along those lines. And then they need to know, okay, this contract that we've drafted, what law applies to this? And if, for example, I send a shipment of rice to somebody in Dubai and in the middle it sinks, whose liability is that? That is also known as conflict of laws, because this system and that system, their laws are somewhat in conflict. And people often make a mistake that my center, the conflict law center, is the conflict of law center. No, that's not what it is. We look at armed conflict, not armed contracts. Alright, so it's very different there. Okay, so when we discuss international law, and some of the debate we've already had, which was very good, it's not really law because powerful states can violate the law with impunity. There's no real enforcement mechanism. How many of you agree with this? Hands, come on, be brave. If you agree with this, raise your hand. If you don't agree with this, keep it down. Okay. So the majority of the class agrees that it's not really law, because law, one, can be enforced, and secondly, ideally, you shouldn't have the Vadera's son being able to abuse the law against the worker in the factory or something like that, right? Let's see. All right, let's stop here again. Oh. But can international law still be called law despite these fundamental problems?
Yeah.
International law is overwhelmingly obeyed by most states most of the time. In fact, by most states almost all of the time. The only reason that we think international law fails is because the few incidences of its failure are headline making news.